Welcome to the Cairn. I'm Ben Walker. This is where we sit down with leaders navigating real challenges, people thinking seriously about the future and what it takes to balance people, process and technology when everything's changing. Each episode we explore how leaders actually build strategy, drive real change and get things done in an increasingly uncertain landscape. Whether they're transforming education or revolutionising patient care, these are the conversations with people getting it done. Practical thinking, real outcomes. This is the Ken. Let's get into it. Today I'm joined by Scott Arrol. Scott's one of those people whose career makes more sense when you see it as a whole. He started in business ownership, moved into health through Radius Health Group and Kindercare, then spent 5 years leading community services at Healthcare of New Zealand. From there he ran NZHIT for nearly 7 years, where he grew the membership from about 65 up to 160 and turned it into the leading voice for New Zealand's digital health sector. He then led Dementia NZ and motor neuron disease New Zealand as chief executive, before coming back to HiNZ, first as the conference program director and then as interim CE for 12 months. He's a life member at HiNZ and now works independently as a freelance executive and director with governance roles across telehealth, disability and health navigation. What connects all this isn't the titles, it's the way Scott brings together people, whether it's clinicians, developers, families or policymakers. He's someone who builds ecosystems rather than just organisations. He also ran his own podcast at NZHIT, Digital Health Insights, so he's not a stranger to these sort of conversations. And he interviewed thought leaders across digital health in Aotearoa and internationally. He's also a fellow passionate runner and parkrun enthusiast. Scott's an active parkrun ambassador and runs the Kiwi Parkrun Runners YouTube channel, which I haven't actually had a look at, so I'm going to have to check that out, Scott. And he's put in some serious mileage for causes close to his heart, including running a very large distance to raise funds for motor neuron disease New Zealand. So we've got plenty to talk about. Scott, welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, gosh, it's a bit scary when you put it all like that, mate.
I know, when you start to line everything up, you're like, wow, I've had so many of these experiences and moved through so many different transitions. So let's start on that, Scott. You started your career in business ownership and management and then moved into health through Radius Health Group and Kindercare before running community services at Healthcare in New Zealand. What drew you from the commercial world into health, and was there a moment when it all clicked for you and you thought this is the place where I belong?
I couldn't pinpoint an actual moment, but I think actually sort of my working career started quite a few years before what you've just described too. And so I'd come through, I guess to sum it all up, mate, I've never been afraid to say I can do something and then figure out what that something actually is and how to do it, as I get going and get into things. So, my career actually spans kind of, starting out as a young man. Gosh, I worked on a trainee linesman for a power company. I wish I could say going up and down power poles, but actually when you're a trainee, you do all the shit work, right? In those days, linemen were linemen, right? The ladders were made of wood and the trainee had to cart all the ladders and put the ladders up, make smoko, all of that sort of stuff. I was able to go up some poles, pretend I was doing some power work. So it goes a long way back through then working on dairy farms and down in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, mostly, and during the kiwi fruit development heydays, working for a large kiwi fruit development corporation, really, turning dairy farms into kiwi fruit orchards, and then some deer farming, converting, again, dairy farms, a bit of a theme there, into deer farms and farming those, so farming deer, of course, through into a time when I actually set up a wine shop and got that going. So, gosh, I had a gas station, so I had a period of time there when I was a agent dealer, they call them, at a BP service station, and that was probably my first real foray into commerce, into what you might call business. The rest of the time before then was kind of just doing what I seemed to do well, which was a combination of, a lot of it was hard labour, quite a bit of it was bullshit, and the rest of it was just getting some stuff done and working with people. And so I've had those kind of experiences, I guess what you might call nowadays life experiences, and some hard knocks along the way. And so then when Anna, my wife and I got into business together with the BP service station, and we were there for quite some time, and we grew the service station. It was the 24-hour station, still there in Te Puke, which is kind of where I came from, where I went to high school, and then went back to run the business. And at a point somewhere there, I decided, actually, I'd never been to university and anything like that, so I started to become interested in business and commerce and marketing and everything that goes along with running a business. So we were exiting the service station business for a variety of reasons, main one being actually we thought we'd done pretty well. In fact, we had, and I thought it was time to do something else. Then when I started the executive MBA program at Waikato University, which is the part-time kind of for 2 years. For me, it was 3 years because I didn't have any prior tertiary qualifications, so they made me do a diploma for a year to prove that I could actually, I was as smart as I told them I was, and then I could do the MBA program, which I did. Really enjoyed it, and it was at that time that when I kind of tripped over myself and got into health in a way, because I needed a job. We'd sold out of the service station business. We'd relocated from Te Puke to Hamilton, and so I could be closer to doing the program, the MBA, and also it was a part-time MBA, and I was paying for it all myself, so needed a job. So got a job actually in the medical alarm industry, is of all things back then. So aged care and providing medical alarms to people living in their own homes to help them be at home for longer. Really enjoyed that, and it just so happened I sort of teamed up with a chap called Tom Wilson, who we became good mates and still are. And during that MBA period, sort of into the final few months, we were working together. He was running a much larger organisation, and I was running the sort of the medical alarm part of that. And we decided to kind of separate from that organisation, and there was an opportunity came up for us to start what became, or what we called at the time, Radius Health Group. And so all of a sudden this MBA stuff, which I thought was quite academic at the time, became quite real. And so then it was pretty much full on for another 2 years, setting up and operating, getting Radius Health Group underway, which was really moving from that kind of fringe of healthcare, which was the medical alarm side of things, and working with St. John because they monitored them. So I sort of started to build relationships around that sector, and then into Radius, which was actually bringing together, partly the medical alarm type business and GP, general practice, or what was back in the first iterations of accident and medicals, accident and emergencies, or the A&Ms, I think they called them. And then also my first kind of foray and experience with private equity investment, which was what fueled Radius Health Group initially to get it going. So gosh, man, that started kind of before you even picked up from bed. So, so that's how I would say I tripped into health, because it just sort of, before I knew it, I was in. And the interesting thing is I've observed that with other people as well. And so we got Radius Health Group going, and then there was a little bit of an anomaly in there, kind of a glitch in the matrix to a degree, because you mentioned Kindercare, which really wasn't healthcare, it was early childhood care and education. And that was an opportunity really, it has been really full on with Radius for a long time. It was an intense period of time, and I needed a break and wanted to just apply my MBA stuff and everything else I'd learned before then, in a related sector in a way, but different. And because Kindercare it was a family operated, set up and operated organisation, very large in Auckland, with a very clear sort of ethos around families, children, and supporting them to be the best they could be. And the family ownership, and particularly the founder, Glennie Oborn, was just such an amazing person. And she wanted to expand. She was big in Auckland, but nowhere else. And she wanted to expand, not because she wanted to make more money, but because she had developed quite a unique early childcare system, and she wanted more children and families to benefit from it. So my role was really up GM or something like that, but it was really about assisting her and the family to spread across New Zealand, which which I got, I started, and they've continued to do, and they had no governance as such, so helped them to set up a board of directors, and so for me it was really a great experience because to work with such an inspirational founder with a different ethos to, let's say, private equity, and somebody who was courted by private equity, and some of the money that she was offered was eye-watering, and continued to turn it down because she wasn't in it for the money. So for me, that was a great experience, and it set me up for then moving from that into aged care, which was my kind of next iteration that you mentioned, and then home-based care, community care, and so forth. And I always remember, and still do, that kind of grounding from my Kindercare times. At the end of the day, if you're not focused on what you're doing in terms of benefiting and adding value for others, then why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah. And there's a real theme there that started to develop, Scott, around that care aspect and actually delivering to, I guess, communities and families, etc. So, and you had such diverse experience that started to come together. What are some of the key things that you pulled through and helped you to become the leader that you've become? Well, and I guess there's a few different strands there.
I guess showing my age, because I come from a time when I started out in management a long time ago, which harks back really to the kiwi fruit dairy farming days, where it was very much the boss's way or the highway, and and if you didn't like it, well then the option was the highway, and then moving through that to never really feeling very comfortable either working for a boss that was like that or being a boss that was like that. But way back then, there was it was kind of, that was the way it was, really starting to learn from some others. And I guess it was once I got into that kind of more formal kind of MBA type environment, that, and with the cohort, my colleagues in that class, learning from them, because they all came from very different backgrounds and careers and industries, and then realizing actually no, it doesn't work the best like that. It only feels like it does, but once you get out of it, there's a whole other way of developing your leadership. But now and again, recognizing what my drivers was a very important part of my leadership development, but also understanding what triggers those in a negative way and learning from people. I remember from a guy that I worked with, it was my boss in actually Healthcare New Zealand days, and I remember he was one of these wise men who would come out with these, what seemed to be a cliche, but later it fell into place, but it was sort of like, there's sort of no right way to do the wrong thing, and that's kind of stuck with me for a long time. And that, being yourself's important, and part of that though is understanding that not everything goes right all the time. You're trying to get everything right all of the time actually drives you down, quite a stressful path in life, really. Not only for yourself, but for those around you. There's times when that's needed, and a lot of my career has involved me stepping into organisations at times of their life cycle when things are not going well. Something's changed in the industry or the environment that organisation's working in, operating in. It's been fine for a while, in some cases quite a while, but something triggers, something changes. It's like that movie, The Matrix. There's a little anomaly in the Matrix, and suddenly what used to go well is no longer going well. And it takes an organisation and the people often in that organisation, and this is not just one particular experience I've had, but a number. It doesn't often become obvious to them. It's definitely not straight away. And so those organisations hang on to, and the people in them hang on to the way we've always done. Right? And so that I guess I've found myself in situations where I've had to go into an organisation and say, well, hey, we don't want to lose all of that, but actually we have to change some of it. And actually we have to introduce something that you've never done before. And here's the reason why. Sometimes that takes tough love, because there's some people that will just never get it. And that's really tough. Ultimately, some decisions have to be made about, well, if whatever organisation wants to still hang around and do what it does and do it well, then some tough decisions do need to be made, and it's not everybody can be kept happy in those circumstances.
Yeah. So one of those organisations is potentially NZHIT. You came in there and were in the organisation for about a 7-year period of time, and you really transformed that and grew the organisation. What was your approach to the turnaround there? And I'm sure you're going to talk about some of those sort of traits that you gained from previous experiences and leading the way you'd want to be led. And how did you bring people together that potentially didn't sit on the same side of the table?
Yeah, NZHIT I really enjoyed NZHIT, which for viewers and listeners is what is now known as Digital Health Association, or DHA, which, 7 years I was there, sort of led and engineered quite a bit of change. Then my Rule Jensen, who took over from me after I left, she took it to another level, did fantastic. And now, of course, Stella Ward is the CEO there, and will take it another level again, I'm sure, and already is. So, it's great, really, to be able to look back and say, yeah, I really enjoyed that period. And even more so that what I was able to keep going. And actually, Dougal McKechnie before me, had done a really good job as well. And so, and it quite often is this way with, these types of organisations. There's a period of time when a person or people come together, and it just, it's the time, and then some tough decisions have to be made and some hard work has to be done. It's great to be able to leave something for the next person, and great to look at that and go, hey, isn't that fantastic? They've done really well. But specifically NZHIT, and when I first started there, I knew it was, and that was a really good example. That I come out of home-based care, community health. If my laptop didn't turn on first thing in the morning, I was on the phone to some IT person who would tell me, well, actually, I think you're hitting the wrong button, Scott. So that was my extent of IT knowledge. And then, kind of, fortunately, the board at the time, which Jodie Mitchell was the chair, was very understanding, because I said, as long as you don't want me to write code or anything like that, I think I can do this job. And they had faith in me, and off I went. That was a good example of, an organisation that had, in a sector that had experienced a lot of change. And as I say, Dougal before me, he had managed that really well. But then when you cast forward, so it was in a kind of a period of transition without it knowing. And so it was really about putting on a strategic hat and going, what does the future look like? Not for NZHIT, but for the sector, for the IT sector. So we didn't talk about digital back then. So it was then saying, we've got this period with the Ministry of Health and the Health IT Board back in those days, which was also kind of trying to find its way from what was, again, showing my age, the Horn Report, and what came out of that, and the creation of the Health IT Board, that then led on, to what became data and digital and so forth. I had to navigate all that because there was a time when people at the Ministry of Health were struggling, just as we were, with what does the future look like. And they had more constraints than I did. But yes, it was very much about taking people who had seen NZHIT and still did at that time as being an industry formed and advocacy/lobbying body, and kind of the enemy was the ministry and PHOs and all of those, that they should be kept at an arm's length, on purpose. But then also at a time when some entrepreneurs and startups were coming into the sector and going, really, we want to collaborate, we want to have relationships that so let's say the incumbents really didn't have. But so it was an interesting time. So it was really about saying, hey, we've got to create an environment in NZHIT that establishes the ability for people to get around the table and talk, understand each other's differences, and then try to get together and talk about what does the future look, and how does each of us and them work together to try to achieve it. Understanding that, NZHIT was an industry peak body, and helping the industry players to understand what that really meant. So going from, because the word peak body was not well understood. by IT folk in those days. So I'd come from, home-based care, community care, where, there was a big body, and I was actually on the executive committee of that for a while. And so I, kind of was more grounded in that space. And then coming to NZHIT and saying, oh, well, actually, you know what, guys and girls, we're the industry peak body for IT, health IT. And there was a bit of scratching your heads and saying, we don't really get peak body. What's that mean, mate? Just get in there and make sure that we can make more money. And I say, well, there's another way of doing it. You can still make money, but let's not pretend that that's what you're about. There is a place for profit, and actually a really big place, because at that time, the for profits, had really driven a lot of the development in the health IT space. IT existed. There was health IT systems that existed because of for profit. So why not just say that? Let's not beat around the bush. But for profit has to learn to work with government. It has to learn to work with NGO, not for profit, and within a health space where clinicians, and patients and people, really they are the bottom line. Yes, you want to make some money, because if you don't make money, then you're not in business. We do live in a society that mostly gets that, and that you can't work in health and anywhere in health and expect to make mega profit.
I love hearing that you're thinking around more of the partnership aspect and the different dynamics that everyone was bringing to the picture, or maybe the legacy that needed to not be forgotten about, but the things that needed to change for us to start to move forward into a digital space rather than just this transitional sort of IT space. What were some of the key things that you thought about when you were trying to bring these people to the table who came from different backgrounds? Was there a key sort of aspect? Was it getting them aligned in their thinking around trust or partnership or joint outcomes?
Well, I think the big thing was actually, they were members. So they didn't have to be members. And in fact, membership had been dropping, and primarily because of the change in the sector and uncertainty, there was dropping membership. Some couldn't see the value of being a member, so they were leaving or not renewing, and then we weren't getting enough coming in to replace them. So the attrition rate was bigger than that was a negative figure. So it was really understanding for me was nobody had to do anything that I told them or asked them to do. So they needed to have a reason that resonated with them to, number one, be a member. That was important. But if you weren't a member, how could you still have value? And then then you might get to a point where you go, well, actually, I want more value. So then I understand that I should pay some money and be a member. And the solution and how some could work together outside of the NZHIT environment that I generated. So I'd say, and quite often I would be saying, hey, well, you need to talk to this person. I'll put you together because you've told me you've got this problem. And I know from what this other person has told me that they're already solving it, or the two of you together could solve it, whereas the two of you apart, separate, can't solve it. So it was kind of identifying how I could create these connections, adding value all of the way through. And then, so membership growth came from that, where we were saying, I spent the first couple of months, because the finances in the organisation were pretty dire, worked pretty hard initially just to keep a job and have a salary coming in, and that was fine. That was what you do in these environments, in these situations. So it was really, I spent a lot of the first 2 months just meeting with people, ex-members, asking why did you stop being a member, existing members, finding out why their membership was tenuous, because most of them were telling me we don't think we're going to rejoin, or some were still members and had paid their membership fee, some for a couple of years. So then the question was, why hadn't you been paying your fee, and what would it take you to pay your fee? Talking to others that had never been members and saying, well, what would value look like to you? In which case you'd be prepared to pay for it. And so then putting all of those conversations together and going, oh, okay, big thing in any membership organisation is one size doesn't fit all. Right? So, and that was kind of the shift that I started, was saying, well, if you're a startup and you're trying to make the way in this space that's been dominated by incumbents, relatively large incumbents, and some of them with pioneers in the sector, still doing great things and wanting to do even more great things, but also a bit suspicious about new entrants. It's like, okay, well, there's the value for a new entrant is different to the value for an incumbent. But there is value of getting the two together. Even if they don't agree with each other to start with, and even if they might see each other as competitors, create an environment where the competitive aspect is not a problem and it's not discussed. A lot at the time used to say, oh, you can't get us together, Scott, because we'll get accused of collusion, pricing collusion. And I said, my response to that was, well, that's probably a bit naive, because ultimately the taxpayer, through the funder, i.e. the government agency, they decide whether you're going to get a contract or not. And the clever thing is, a lot of these entrepreneurs at the time coming in, new startups, they were looking at the sector in a whole different way. They were saying, how do we enter a sector that's dominated by government contracts, but we don't want to be dominated like that. We want to actually create a market that pays us for what we create, not for what an RFP or an ROI determines. And also then create an environment with the ministry people and PHO people and so on would go, oh, okay, it is safe to get in a room with for-profit after all, but at the same time, a bit of tough love and a bit of honesty. They're saying to some of the members, the IT members, saying, well, you know what, if I can get you in the room with some people that you want to talk to and talk about things to, and they want to be there, including clinicians, but how about we spend a bit of time talking about how you talk to them? Because you're talking to them in a sales speak, which sounds great. Man, they're not hearing it that way. So it's that whole thing of, they're talking in one direction and the hearing is in a whole different direction. Say, well, and also but then talking to the other side and saying, they don't really understand you. Because back then, having a clinician on your team wasn't necessarily the dumb thing. So I would be saying, hey, why don't you, say if you're a for-profit IT software developer, why don't you get on board without any conflict? You can do this. If you have the right way about you and the right people, you can do this where you can start getting direct clinical advice about the product you're developing. And why wouldn't you do that before you launch this product? Because if you launch the product and it flops, man, you never recover from that. And particularly if you launch a product and you've oversold, man, that's even worse. So it was really creating an environment where people felt safe, and I guess I became that middle person who would say to one party, tone it down, mate, but also then say to the other party, kind of try to drop some of your natural barriers, and there's nothing wrong with those barriers, but try to drop them and listen to the components and the bits that will make sense in terms of your ability and your desire to provide the best quality healthcare you can. And sometimes after a meeting or a discussion, there would be a bit from one party or the other, or sometimes I'd have both coming at me, as a bitch session, and I'd have to be then interpreting, it was sort of like an interpreting service. So, well, hang on, I think you've misinterpreted the way that was said, and maybe we could revisit it in a different way. Fundamentally, though, kind of coming back to your leadership question, was kind of, I've always stuck to being myself, never trying to be someone that I'm not, and always coming across like that to say, well, at the end of the day, sometimes I might try to gild the lily, but, just because I think you might be oversensitive type of flower, but I will always be honest with you, and if you don't like that honesty, I don't mind if you tell me that, because you're not going to get anything other than that from me. And not being prepared to shy away from some of the tough conversations. You know, there were some incumbent members, only a handful, that were dead against the likes of PHOs being members of NZHIT. They're like, absolutely not. You know, if you have them as members, Scott, then I'm walking away. I've had it. You know, I will never be a member again. I said, well, okay. Well, you've paid for the rest of the year anyway, so if you decide not to be a member now, you're not getting your fees back. So thanks very much. And, you know, so it was those types of conversations. Like, you're going to have some faith in me, because this adversary approach to the likes of PHOs, for example, and PHOs in general were very keen to engage, but engage in a different way than had been the case up to then. And so it was about convincing some of these members that, there's some benefit, but you can't see the benefit yet. So if you don't have faith in me, then I'll understand it. If you do have some faith in me, and not just me, the board at the time of NZ, they were totally supportive, and at times they probably shook their heads and thought, what the hell have we employed here? So most of the time it worked, but not always straight away. It was about, because not everybody gels, not everybody's going to get on. And so those are the key little leadership things, was kind of being myself, being honest, being prepared to have, to face some pretty difficult conversations and make some decisions that would not please everybody.
Yeah.
But then also integrity. There were some times, whether it was within a government agency or an NGO or a for-profit, where I would not do something because my integrity didn't allow me to, or I would have a conversation because I felt that the NZHIT as an organisation and myself as an individual would not get involved in that, or calling people to account because some behaviours were not acceptable. And sometimes including mine. I was never a saint either, right? And I still aren't. So I guess one of my traits is, if I've pissed you off, then just tell me. That's quite often I'll make the situation worse, not better.
Now, a couple of things that stand out for me there, Scott, and I know you've only got a couple more minutes, so I've got two more questions for you that I'm going to try and slip in. A couple of things that stand out are your people-first approach. And I know I've been to numerous conferences and different digital health type events, and you're always there out pressing the flesh. Communication is the second thing. And then another thing that came through is the alignment, trying to seek alignment. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's aligned, but definitely pockets of alignment when you've got your different vendors at the table and different consumers, clients, etc. As AI becomes a bigger part of the health conversation, what do you think the health sector needs from its leaders right now? Because there's a real change in the way, and I guess it's this change towards digital, and now we're pivoting towards AI, and there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt, but there's so much opportunity as well. So what do we need today?
Let's say the age-old issue or problem, however you want to look at it, or the thing that can create the most opportunity and solutions is, I think what AI has done is testing us all and testing traditional business models, and then also what aren't business models, which are, let's say, the bureaucratic models that are in place around funding, around procurement, around government, some government agencies actually competing, whether it's with the private sector or within the NGO, not-for-profit space, the different approach towards collaborating, because, or what the term that I love is that collaboration. I don't like collaboration as a word, or collaborating. I think it's one of those words that has been tossed around as a kind of a real kind of sexy thing to say, which really doesn't mean anything. You can collaboration is really about saying, we're going to work on something together, and we're going to create. And working together means we have to take some actions, and by taking actions and working together, we will create results. Now, and in the strategic, so that tends to be relational and operational. The strategic part is to say, what is it, those results, what are those results actually going to create influence and create? So you have to look forward first to come back to now, to the present, but then look back a bit further to say, well, what hasn't worked? And so AI is actually saying it gives us the ability to do all of that, accepting, of course, that AI at the moment wants to be incredibly agreeable with us all, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Every morning I say, hey, Copilot, what do you think of me? And it always tells me I'm marvelous. So why wouldn't you love AI at the moment? And that will evolve, of course, to AI actually challenging us in a way that humans may not enjoy very much. Because if I challenge someone, people get offended, right? If AI challenges us, how are we going to cope with that? Yes. And by the way, I'm already AI because it's Arrol intelligence, right? So you can sort of get an idea where I'm coming from. Okay, so basically what AI is doing is challenging traditional models, whether you're in business and you're a traditional business model, or whether you're in government, you're a public servant. Whether you're in public servant, if you're a clinician working in the public health space, you're a public servant, and if you're a teacher in the public education space, you're a public servant. All of those things, recognizing who you are, where you are, what you do, and the model you're operating in. And if you're finding it tough, often, and at the moment you will be, because not just about AI, but lots of things going on, where you will find that somehow the model you're operating in and trying to do what you love doing is changing or changed, and you don't realize it, you don't understand it. So that's where I see AI, and I think leadership, whether it's political leadership, governmental leadership, not for profit, for profit, so we're in governance or executive leadership, all the way to the point of, if you're providing care at any point of the continuum, you're a leader. Whether you're back in my home-based care days, if you're a support worker going into somebody's home and doing something for them, regardless of what that is, it is the most important thing in the world that you are doing for that particular person, for that client or that patient. You could be going in and helping them, do their dishes and do some cleaning up and stuff like that. That is incredibly important. All the way through, if you're operating in an ED department or a surgeon or whatever, at that point where you're interacting with a client or a patient or whatever you call them, that to the patient or client that is a person is the most important for them at that particular time of their life. And most of us get that. But AI and the rest of the environment that we operate in is changing. It's changing so dynamically and so quickly. It's difficult to understand, how we can continue to do that and do it well. So I think, and this is an old thing really, the procurement frameworks have to change. That's not news. That's not new news. We've been saying that in the sector for too long. The funding models have to change. Again, not new news. I think one of the biggest things that has to stop is the way that collaboration or collaboration is viewed. And if it's looked at in a whole different way and approached differently, that should and must inform and change what are those previous two things: the procurement methods, models, and the way those are funded. Because there's been and a bit controversial here, and I've seen it across not just one government agency for a long time, numerous, and it hasn't changed. Is lip service given to what innovation really means, and what collaboration really means, or collaboration? What is the purpose of doing all this stuff at the end of the day? And finally, I'll leave it on that, on an equation, a value equation that I learned a long time ago that I apply to my own life and to business and whatever, and to running. For example, it's V equals B minus C. V is value, B is benefit, and C is cost. Right? So if you get more benefit from what it's cost you, then you've derived value. Simple as that. Yeah. But it's not all about dollars, right? So, say from a running perspective, or kind of from what we do in all of our personal lives, the benefit for me of doing parkrun and the volunteering that I do, which is, some people say to me, I'm nuts. It's because I get benefit from it, and the cost to me is far less than the benefit. So I'm getting huge value. So why wouldn't I do it? I love it.
That's a great equation.
But if you
Scott,
apply that,
I love it.
yeah, if you apply it in an accounting sense, it kind of doesn't work, because it is dollars as well. It can be dollars, but it's subjective and it's situational. Because if you buy a bottle of water, one of those pump bottles of water from the service station, right now when it's pouring outside, you're only buying that water because you want to hydrate. You want to get however your litre of water down today, regardless of whether you need it or not. I hadn't bought bottled water, actually. I usually get it out of a tap. But that bottle of water, what I paid for it today from a gas station, service station, or a dairy or a supermarket, is a lot less expensive than if I'm in the middle of the desert and I have to buy a bottle of water because I'm about to dehydrate and die. So if I had $1 million in my pocket at that particular point, well, I think I would pay $1 million for that bottle of water if it meant that I could live. So the benefit of paying $1 million in that circumstance is greater because it's my life. Therefore, I value my life.
Those variables
V
change,
equals
don't
B
they?
minus C.
Yeah, depending on the circumstance.
Really simple. Like, you'll be surprised it doesn't get applied often enough. And I've preached it for a long time, so I feel like I've failed, really, because not many people use it. But, I'll keep doing it, because one day, I'll be recognised as some sort of evangelist for the value equation.
Now, Scott, I'm holding you up because I know you need to go. I've got one last question for you, and I don't need a long answer, just a one-word answer. A lot of people give me a one-word answer to this question. In the age of AI, what's the one trait that defines human leadership?
In the age of AI, has got to be trust. Do we trust AI and what it's going to do for us? Yeah. So trust is the one word that opens up a whole nother podcast interview.
Yeah, fantastic.
We'll have to do it.
Might have to be episode 2 of the Scott Arrol saga.
Yeah. And it's just shocked me. Don't feel bad that I've rambled on, because everybody says, crikey, you're brave interviewing Scott, because he never shuts up.
We'll cut it there, Scott. A big thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate you coming along and having a chat to me and being so open, talking about the health ecosystem, leadership, trust, and what it means to be at the centre of health in so many different roles over such a period of time and making such an impact. It's been a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity. And again, on that same theme, I just always love the opportunity to talk, mate. Definitely on a topic that I'm very passionate about, obviously. Okay, see you later.
That's the kid. Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, share it with a leader at your network who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you listen to stay updated on the next conversation. Visit NZ for show notes, resources and more. Connect with us on LinkedIn or Instagram for updates in between episodes. I'm Ben Walker. We'll be back soon with another conversation that matters. See you then.